Hello and welcome to AP Human Geography, Chapter 8, Key Issue 4. We're going to take a look at why do states cooperate and compete. One of the first examples we have of states competing and allying with each other in more modern times is the Cold War. We think about that time after World War II and what happened up till like the 1990s. So in the early 20th century, so when we say 20th century, we're talking about the early 1900s. Early 20th century powers, you had major states that were Austria, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. After World War II, this becomes a really unbalanced situation with just two superpowers standing out, which were the United States of America and the Soviet Union. And again, this is between after World War II or during 1940s there, that's the middle of it, and up to the 1990s. In these type of situations and after World War II, you would see Russia going into countries to bolster them up. They sent troops in because they wanted to protect them. They didn't want people leaving their countries, and they didn't want people coming in to take them over. Example countries were Hungary and Czechoslovakia. But the U.S. does the same thing, where we sent troops into the Dominican Republic, into Grenada, and to Panama. And so both sides really are vying for power in states that aren't their own, but in states where they were setting up strategic powers and military installations. During the height of this in the 1960s, early in the 1960s, you have President John F. Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. And you can see some of the satellite images here where the United States had a lot of concern about what Soviet Russia was doing in Cuba, where they brought in or were building missile silos and missile launch capabilities just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, and that was a big concern. A lot of this was strategic positioning of both of the superpowers to see perhaps who would have more power in that delicate balance that was going on. And the cooperation that you had in Europe were really two-sided as well, where you had NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which the United States was a part of, and the Warsaw Pact, which consisted of the Eastern Communist countries. And these two organizations really went against each other. You look at the European military and economic alliances over the years. So in 1980, in the height of the Cold War, you've got Eastern Europe over here, Soviet Russia, which has got all of this. These are a lot of the Warsaw Pact countries. And you have Western Europe, where you've got this European community, NATO over here, that's on the other side of all this going on. You also have some countries that are like in with NATO, but not really tied into the European community. Fast forward to 2013 at the time of the printing of this book, and it's a much different situation to where most countries are, all of them are embedded into NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. After the collapse of Soviet Russia, you really saw countries switching over to democracy and to joining of NATO. Economic alliances in Europe. How do people work together? Well, you've got the European Union, the EU. It was formed in 1958 by the countries of Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and West Germany. Over the years, it has expanded to more countries after the fall of communism, and it's governed by a parliament with representation from each country. What the European Union does is it gives subsidies to farmers and it helps struggling regions. Most of these trade barriers across the European Union are removed, where you see the free movement of cargo and trade and transactions and commerce. They have a common currency. You think of the euro, where you can use that money in any country that's in the European Union. And English tends to be the common language. And things were really moving forward for the European Union. And then in 2016, which is 1 month from the recording of this video, the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union through what was termed the Brexit, or the Britain exit, where Europe really was feeling like, where the United Kingdom was really feeling like culturally they were not satisfied with what was going on with the European Union because they didn't really feel like they had their own culture anymore. The second thing was economic concerns. Not only did the United Kingdom have to pay money to the European Union to be a part of it, but a lot of the money was leaving the country in fees and trade and commerce that was going elsewhere, plus having to support other countries that were struggling like Greece. For all of these reasons, the United Kingdom has voted recently to leave the European Union. And so while it's a good setup, there's also a lot of issues with it as well. And you can see just recently the United Kingdom left. Terrorism, we're still looking at why states cooperate or why are they, kind of against each other. Well, one of the things that gets states to work together to fight against is terrorism. Terrorism is the systematic use of violence by a group in order to intimidate a population or coerce a government. Examples over the course of history that have affected the United States was 1988, the Pan Am Flight 103 in Lockerbie, Scotland, that was blown up. In 93, you got the car bomb under the World Trade Center, but it didn't destroy the World Trade Center. 95, you had the car bomb in the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, where it was huge, huge news because I was a kid back then. I was just entering college, and they blew up the whole building. 1996, there was a truck bomb that killed U.S. soldiers in Saudi Arabia. In 98, there were embassies in Kenya and Tanzania that were bombed. In 2000, the USS Ecole, this was a ship that was bombed in Yemen. And of course, the big one that is still fresh on a lot of people's minds is 2001, which was the September 11th attacks where they struck the Pentagon. The plane went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the two World Trade Center buildings. And so we asked the question, why do states form alliances? And in these situations, dealing with the United States, states join together to form a coalition to fight extreme terrorism because of these things have built up over time. And the premise that's been given to us is that countries, including the United States, have gone in to fight against states that support terrorism. They've gone in to fight countries that supply sanctuary or a place for these terrorist groups to train, for them to get money, for them to store weapons, to create weapons. And so from our book, just reading straight off the facts that were presented, we gather together as countries to go fight terrorism. Now, as a individual person, not necessarily as a teacher, I want to caution all of us on this situation and get us to think that, okay, there's a lot more reasons that we went into countries to go fight. And I don't want to get into all that, but I also don't want to be the teacher that just does what he's told and mentions everything as it is in the textbook. I think there's a lot more reason for banding together, and terrorism has been used as that tool. But there's a little hint into that. That's chapter 8, key issue 4. That's going to complete the chapter on political geography. Excuse me, and I cracked up at the end there. That's going to complete the chapter on political geography.